By now, many of you have seen this video.
Because for the past 16 months, she's been getting bullied inside these halls along with her friends, and nobody's doing a damn thing
About a father being visibly and rightfully upset about his daughter being bullied by students in her school. I was tagged a whole bunch of times because in it, he talks about whether or not he can sue for the bullying that's happening. As a parent, attorney, law professor, and frankly, someone who was bullied in school, this obviously has my attention. While the laws on this are obviously pretty complicated, I'm going to break it down in the easiest way that I can. There are generally 3 groups that you could sue, although each one has different nuance. It's an initial matter because I saw this in the comments and because this came up in one of my First Amendment classes a couple years ago, where a student claimed that their ability to bully someone on social media specifically was just free speech. And that was somewhat murky at the time. It's not really anymore under Doe v. Hopkinton Public Schools. U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that the ability to bully someone on the Snap app was not protected speech. Also, to be clear, there is a significant and important difference between bullying that is happening on school grounds or at school-sponsored activities versus bullying that's happening outside of school, let's say on social media at home. And most of that has not been resolved, although there have been some important cases that just haven't quite reached the Supreme Court level. First bucket, can you sue the school? All 50 states have enacted some version of an anti-bullying law for schools. In every state except Montana, that law requires the school to have a formal identification process for finding out what the bullying is and dealing with it. Each state has different definitions and requirements for what bullying is and how it should or should not be handled. So remember, if we're suing a school, then we're probably talking about the state laws about bullying. While each state is different, what you're looking for in terms of liability is generally one of the following things. If the school district failed to properly protect a student against the bullying, sometimes that means that they never drafted, implemented, or followed the policy that they were supposed to under state law. Was staff aware at the school of the bullying that's happening, and did they fail to address it? Which, in Jack's video, it certainly sounds like they knew about it and didn't do anything. An important side note on this, Jack says at one point that when he dealt with someone at the school, they told him, this just sounds like a basic case of harassment that you need to talk to the police about. While yes, that is certainly true, he did happen to find this, the school policy on bullying for the school that Jack's daughter attends. And you'll notice that down here under the reporting requirements for the school itself, it says bullying/hazing/harassment, which most courts are going to read to say, you're saying it's basically one and the same. Under their own standard, if a school staff member is calling it harassment, they're probably already implicating their requirement to do something under their own bullying policy. Finally, a school may also be held liable if the bullying began due to the actions or comments of a school staff member or employee, which is if a teacher makes a comment about how a student appears or dresses, and then the bullying begins around that issue from other students. Next, the school district. Now, most times, if you're going to sue a public school for something like this, you're also going to include the district. It's typically because they have more resources to be able to pay out on a claim, or because they may be held to a higher standard of liability if they also knew about the bullying and didn't do anything. This is important though, because many of these districts receive federal funding. If that's the case, and your child is being bullied because they are a member of what's called a federally protected class, you can also sue under federal law, such as if the bullying involves racial discrimination that could be implicated under the Civil Rights Act, or if your child has a disability that's protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, or if it involves sexual harassment or sex discrimination that's protected under Title IX. All of these things open up massive liability issues for schools and school districts, especially since a lot of these things tend to happen in groups, which can then trigger a class action lawsuit. Finally, perhaps the trickiest group, and it's the one that Jack brings up in the video, and many people in the comments were surprised and asking a lot of questions about it. That is, can you sue the parents of a child who is bullying your child? The answer is probably yes, with some important caveats. First, the easiest way to find liability is actually going to be to look at those anti-bullying state laws. Some of them, for instance, specifically impose liability on the parents of a child who willfully or maliciously causes harm to another. Many states, at some point or another, have codified electronic aggression somewhere in their legislative statutes on harm. Next thing you're going to want to look at is a negligence claim. To win that, you're going to need to show that the parents actually did something wrong. Essentially, negligence is the failure to use due care under certain circumstances. Or complicated, full-winded explanation is that you're going to need duty, breach, causation, and damages. However, and this is important, in any negligence claim against the parents of a child, you're going to need to prove that the parents actually knew about whatever the bullying issue was and didn't do anything to stop it. If that element is not present, it's going to be hard in many states to win a negligence claim against the parents of a child who is bullying your child, which is why, and this is really, really important, you should notify the parents of the child who is bullying your child that this is happening. Unfortunately, all too often, a parent of a child who's being bullied will bring it to the school, and the school will say, we'll contact the parents, and then they don't actually do it. That failure to notify is the difference between potentially winning a negligence case and losing it. So it's probably not smart to rely on the school to do it for you. And most people don't understand or realize that in the average person's homeowner's insurance policy, it includes acts of negligence, meaning that depending on that parent's homeowner's insurance policy, a claim for bullying might actually be levied against insurance, which is good because if your child is experiencing severe emotional or physical harm and has to, for instance, go to therapy because of the bullying, you're going to want to make sure that that is covered. The average parent in America doesn't have the liquidity to pay out a settlement on bullying. But if you can bring in an insurance company on it, then you might be able to get the funds to actually pay for the care and treatment that your child needs because of the bullying. Finally, there were two additional things in the video that caught my attention that are pretty complicated, and I don't totally know the answer to. First being the ability to take action against a social media company for the actions of a person under the age of 18 on the app. I looked through the policies of the app in question, and I could not find anything on that. It does not mean that it doesn't exist. It might be codified in a different way within a certain state. It just means that personally, I couldn't discover anything on it. And second is a legitimately really frustrating issue that Jack brings up in a subsequent video. And that is a child getting in trouble for filming the bullying that was happening to them under a school policy that is pretty much ubiquitous in most schools across the country about no recording, even if the state in question is a one-party consent state. Because there are minors involved, the school policy probably wins out. Let me tell you, there are some pretty wild cases about parents or students getting in trouble for filming the bullying that was happening to them or to their child that will make you want to rip your hair out. However, as a general note, what I'll say is this. If your child is affected by that, make sure you're seeking a full accounting of whether or not that policy has been applied equally across all instances of electronic device use within the school. Because, for instance, if a school is getting kids in trouble for filming the bullying that's happening to them, but in the past has not gotten a student in trouble for actually filming the bullying they're doing, you may have a very different case that raises important issues about a school's liability and culpability involving the victims of bullying.